town. And as we go along the tour today, that's what we mainly focus on, the lumber history that was once here in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. We also usually go down here and I point out that the Stillwater Lift Bridge built in 1931 is no longer for cars and trucks. It's now bikes and pedestrians, as the new river crossing is about 1.5 miles down that way, and that takes care of the cars. I also usually mention that across the river is the great state of Wisconsin, and at one time this was Wisconsin territory. All this area down towards Hastings and as far west as the International Airport was all once Wisconsin. And in 1858, Minnesota became a state, and they decided to use the St. Croix River as the natural boundary. So that's what I usually say before we usually go down that way, but we're going to have to go out to Main Street. I've still got all the stuff to talk about, and we're not going to really miss anything. We're just not going to be able to drive along by the bridge.
Sana magawa na ng video? Sa'yo na lang.
All right, if you go about 50 miles up to the north, 50 miles, that was the south end of the largest continuous forest of white pine trees known in the upper half of the United States in the mid-1800s. It stretched all the way almost to Canada and as far east as Michigan. That was the forest that was used to bring trees down here and other sawmill towns. We weren't the only one. But at one point we were the largest, the most productive. Now the cutting down of those trees was always done in the winter, and the reason why, those trees were very sappy and they would clog up any machinery and saws and stuff. So they were cut down in the winter, and they were tagged with an identification marker, and they were set out, in our case, on the St. Croix River. Then in the spring of the year, when the ice melted, it would take about 3 weeks for them to be guided down here where they were collected and brought to our sawmills. At one point we had 10 sawmills running, 2 on the Wisconsin side, but they were considered Stillwater sawmills. We're usually not at Main Street at this end of town, but to our right, this building used to house the largest opera house west of Chicago. Why a lumber town needed an opera house, beyond me, but we had one for about a 10-year period, very late 1800s. Now, if you know where Taylor's Falls, Minnesota, and the St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin are, about 18 miles to our north along the river, that was the site of the largest log jam at that time in the United States. Logs destined for this town were backed up 3 miles, and it took 35 days and a lot of dynamite to get those things back on track to make it down here that summer. If you look at this mural on our right, this is what it looked like when those logs made it down here. There's actual pictures, 4 pictures on the top of those murals. That's what it looked like. And one of the toughest jobs there ever was getting those logs identified and off the river to be brought to the proper sawmill. The beige building on our right is our first post office, and as we turn right, on our left is the historic Lowell Inn. It's an exact replica or duplicate of George Washington's Mount Vernon home in Virginia, the 13 columns representing the 13 original colonies. Now in the spring of the year, all those logs were floating down here. Those lumberjacks were back in town. Stillwater had 15 to 20 saloons servicing about 10 to 12,000 workers that worked here during the summer. They wanted to hit those saloons. Let's have some fun. We got some time. I read in a book that the local folks, the good folks in town, would lock their doors, draw their drapes, and send their teenage daughters to Iowa to stay with grandma for the summer. That's the reputation those guys had.
Candyland and Willow.
At the height of the lumber boom, Stillwater had those 10 sawmills. They also had 10 banks, 14 churches, and again 15 to 20 saloons. If you look straight ahead and a little left, you're going to see the big tin building. The Isaac Staples sawmill was located there. That was the largest sawmill in town. Now, Isaac Staples actually lived right above the sawmill in what's now is Pioneer Park. The majority of our lumber barons wanted nothing to do with overlooking downtown. We're talking 24 hours those mills were working, a lot of sound and a lot of smell. But he did overlook his property from right above. You look off to your left, all these condominiums are on the site of what used to be the first state prison in Minnesota. It said that Stillwater was in the running for the state capitol, the prison, and the University of Minnesota, but Stillwater really wanted the prison. They figured it would employ more people long term. So there's really nothing left except the walls that go around it. Two of our prisoners were members of the Jesse James gang, Bob and Cole Younger. They turned out to be model prisoners. It said that they started the Prison Mirror. That is the prison newspaper that's been published twice monthly for over 160 years. One of the longest continual running prison newspapers still going in the United States. This is one of our detours. We usually don't go up this road on the tour. I don't have much to say at this time, but my cousins did live in the house straight ahead. And how we weren't killed playing on those bluffs down there, I'll never know. We probably should have fallen to our death a dozen times when I was younger. Headed up to the residential area of town. You're going to see many old houses, many of them well over 100 years old in fine shape. I'm going to point out 3 of them to you that I think are really neat. First one's coming up at the top of the hill. This yellow house is neat, and what I liked about it was I was actually in there as a kid. I had a friend who lived there. They fixed it up about 25 years ago, and it's due for a paint job, they said, and it's going to be painted soon. But the solarium on the right, the glass solarium, that was brought over about 15 years ago from London, England, and added on. But I remember when I was in there, all the rooms are so small for such a large house, and I asked the dad of my friend, I said, what's with all the small rooms in a house this big? And he said, you got to remember, they were heating everything by fireplace back 150 years ago. And they weren't able to heat more than certain areas at a time. So they pretty much just heated the areas they needed heated at that time. So I guess that makes some sense. Some of you may know who Jessica Lange, the movie actress, is. Well, she grew up in Cloquet, Minnesota. She was acting and working in New York City. When her kids got to be school age, she decided she wanted them to go to school in a smaller town. Her and her partner, Sam Shepard, moved to Stillwater with the kids, and they lived in this house on our left. This used to be the Battle Hollow bed and breakfast, but they turned it into a private residence. And they stayed here till their kids got out of Stillwater schools. Then they moved back to New York City. Again, it amazes me that at one time, for about almost a 20-year period, Stillwater was the #1 lumber town in the United States. More finished lumber produced here than any other one city for about a 20-year period. On our left is the Sauntry Mansion. William Sauntry was another one of our rich lumber barons. He tried building houses that kept burning down. This one survived. There's 29 rooms on the green part of the house. Along the tour, we like to say this might have been the site of the first skyway in Minnesota. As if you look at the roof apexes, these 2 buildings were connected at one time. They left room underneath for the horses and carriages to get back to the barns and stables. But this end of the house up here was designed after the Alhambra Palace in Granada, Spain. It was the entertainment end. They loved to entertain. It's said that this end contained a library, a gymnasium, a ballroom, a billiards room, and an indoor swimming pool. Again, Sauntry loved to entertain, but when the lumber business went bust, he pretty much lost everything. It's said that he took a streetcar to St. Paul, checked into the Ryan Hotel, and the only luggage he brought was a revolver. He did not check out. Now, if you look at the reddish house on our right, and again on our left, the light green one, there are many houses like this around Stillwater. We found out these were boarding houses. If you're a lumberjack, you're here to work in the summer in the mills. You're going to work 10 hours a day. You don't need a lot of space. Just enough room for a small bed, maybe a bath once a week, whether you needed it or not. Now, Isaac Staples, the guy who owned the big tin building on the north end of town. He was one of Minnesota's first multi-millionaires. Adjusted for today, would have been worth about $80 million. He also had 2 daughters, and when the oldest daughter got married, as a gift to her and her husband from mom and dad, they received this house off to our left. This is now the Aurora Staples Bed and Breakfast. My daughter got engaged 2 Fridays ago. I said, what's wrong with a set of knives or some dishes or something? To our left, the Stillwater Public Library, built in 1902. This is a Carnegie Library. In the late 1800s, Andrew Carnegie was one of the wealthiest men in America. He made his money from steel. But when he got a little older, he decided to give some of that money away. It's said that he fully funded or partially funded 2,600 libraries in the United States. A very philanthropic man. Now, if you take Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett, their combined wealth at this time is approximately $600 billion. But if you took Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and John D. Rockefeller, their combined worth, today's dollars, would be over $1 trillion. That's how much money and business those 3 men controlled. We're going to turn left and head down this little driveway. I want you again to look to your left. On the back of the light reddish church to the left, there's some stained glass windows. If you can look through the trees, you might be able to glance the largest one. Those windows were purchased in the early 1900s for about $2,000, which was a lot of money back then. They were appraised about 15 years ago and it came back priceless. We cannot put a value on replacing those windows in today's dollars. They were purchased from a little company in New York. You may have heard of Tiffany and Company. And if you look on the bottom right-hand corner of the largest one, there's the signature of the designer himself, Louis Tiffany. My boss says we should have the Antique Roadshow show up here and take a gander. My boss also drives these tours, and he always tells a joke here, and I'm going to tell the joke, but remember, don't shoot the messenger. Off to our right is Trinity Lutheran Church, the large brick building, and off to our left again is the Episcopal Church. And located between these 2 fine churches is another small brick building. That's our local water department. What kind of water do you produce between churches? Holy water. And how do you make it? You burn the hell out of it. Don't shoot the messenger. Many of our older churches have been converted into condominiums, as has this one straight ahead. I've been told that the woodwork in there is really nice, and there's a lot more stained glass windows on the apartments on the other side. We're going to head halfway up the hill and hope we get a little breeze in here as we're doing it. You're from Stillwater, you know we just left the North Hill and we're now headed up the South Hill. Now if you build a house today, a lot of people like to put a patio or a deck on the house. But back in the day, look at the porches on these old houses, especially here on the South Hill. Couple of great old porches. Sit out there at night with a lemonade. Remember, this was before TV and before air conditioning. You might find out what's going on from a neighbor sitting out on your porch. Earlier I said Isaac Staples had 2 daughters. His youngest daughter got married. And on her wedding day as a present from Mom and Dad, her and her new husband received this white house on the left. Not quite as nice as Aurora's. The reason being, it is said, she married someone Mom and Dad were not fond of. She married a common lumberjack. Still got a house out of it. Another one of my favorite houses, I've toured this one on our left, built by John O'Brien in 1888, another lumber baron house. This is the Rivertown Inn bed and breakfast on our left. All the rooms in the inn are named after a famous author. And if you look down the drive area to our left, our parking area in the back is the Agatha Christie Suites, designed after the railroad car from Murder on the Orient Express. A couple people have told me if you're in there at night, you would swear you're in an actual railroad car. It's that authentic. Get a good view of the river from up here. It's actually a river that flows through a lake from Bayport down to about the Highway 94 bridge in the Hudson. It's actually considered Lake St. Croix. It's a protected waterway, no more building on the shores or bluffs of the St. Croix River. We turn the corner here, you're going to see another of my favorite and most people's favorite houses. This is a private home, but what it has over the others is the amazing view. And let's see if we can sneak by here. What do you think?
You got it.
Oh yeah. You're not getting in trouble if anything happens. Oh yeah, we got it. That was the curb, don't worry. As we head down the hill here, it's not the steepest hill. We'll hit that a little later. Watch out for branches that might try to sneak in. Stillwater's nicknamed the San Francisco of the Midwest, with all our steep hills leading down to the waterfront.
It feels like San Francisco.
Listen up, everyone. This is the Straw Boss talking. I'm one of those men in charge of the camps up north. It's 5 a.m. We're going to have some breakfast. We're going to hit that wagon train, and we're going back to work. You're going to work for me 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and I'm going to pay you the tidy sum of 25 cents an hour, and I want to get my money's worth. Now, it's said that that Straw Boss in charge to up to 2,000 people per lumber camp. They could always keep peace in their camps as long as two things were never present. Both start with a W.
Woman.
Any guesses?
Yeah.
Women.
Or whiskey.
Whiskey. Last tour, two people yelled wine. And I said, I don't think they were the wine kind of drinkers. Women and whiskey.
I've got a house on Pine Street.
Off to our right is a great example of a white pine tree. This was the predominant tree brought down. Millions and millions of trees like this. Long soft needles in clumps or clusters of 5. Behind it is the Ann Bean Mansion, another former lumber baron home. Built in 1880, 142 years old and still in excellent shape. Many of our lumber barons' homes are bed and breakfasts, and they're in fine shape both inside and out. Off to our right is St. Mary's Catholic Church. This was the German Catholic Church in the day. Remember, a lot of our immigrants did not speak English when they came to America. Off to our left is a private residence, but that at one time was the convent for the church. And off to the right was the rectory, and it still is the rectory. The priest serving this church and another one a few blocks away still use this rectory.
Sabi ko lang Catholic Church sa place.
Again, watch out for a stray branch or two. I said earlier, a lot of our former churches are condominiums, as is this one. This in the day was the German Lutheran Church. Another neat old house on our right up here. This was the Hersey home. This used to be 2 stories taller with a great view of the valley. But lightning struck it over 100 years ago, and they had to cap off after they got the fire out. They just capped off the last stories, and it's the height it is now. But what's interesting is when that house was originally made, not one metal screw or nail was used. All wooden pegs and dowels. This was a lumber town with plenty of scrap wood to go around. Coming up on our right is the historic Washington County Courthouse, the oldest standing courthouse in the state. It's no longer a working courthouse. It is used for gatherings and celebrations. Now, many of you are familiar with the song White Christmas, made famous by Bing Crosby. I'm not going to tell you that Bing Crosby was ever in Stillwater, but his mom did grow up 2 blocks east of that church. That is St. Michael's Catholic Church. That was the Irish Catholic Church back in the day, and she was baptized at St. Mike's. I told you a lot of our lumber barons did not want anything to do with the downtown area, with all the sound and the smell and the 24 hours those mills were working. But these houses in front of us, they were owned by the ship owners and the captains of those ships. A lot of steamships came in and out of Stillwater back in the day. The Capital from St. Louis came up twice a summer and brought 1,500 people at a time. We're now headed to the top of the Main Street stairs. A good view of the river looking north. If you remember that mural, think of that mural I showed you earlier. There are pictures from this area showing the river where you can't see over 25% of the water. The rest is completely covered by logs waiting to be picked up and brought to the mills. They stretched chains across the river that stopped them, but they still had to be gathered. Now in 1904, Stillwater set a record. 450 million board feet produced in one summer from one lumber town, and this was it. But less than 10 years later, Stillwater choked on its own sawdust. People left here in droves to find jobs. The population went from 16,000 down to about 3,000. The reason being, when they took down all those trees, they never replanted. The forest was gone. No more trees to cut down, no more trees to float down, and no more trees to collect. So Stillwater went through some tough times. You had World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. But in the 1950s, it kind of bounced back. People saw the beauty of the valley. They bought up those old homes. They turned them into private residences or maybe bed and breakfast. And the businesses came back to the downtown area, most of the touristy businesses that are still prevalent today. So that's pretty much our story. Stillwater, from boom to bust to back where it is now. And a good way of summing it up is what Forbes magazine had in an article about 6 years ago. It named Stillwater as one of the 5 prettiest little cities in the upper Midwest, and I have to agree with that. And a couple of years ago, Travel and Leisure named Stillwater as a top 3 destination for fall colors. So if you get back here in mid to late October and get to one of these high views, the colors are fabulous. I'm going to back up a block and we'll continue on.
There's about, I don't know, 50 stairs. For Matt's bartends, where I told you we can walk up those stairs. A bunch of distance.
Yeah, there's the stairs.
But all these areas is but I'm curious, there really does have a lot of water places. Miami here. The other one, well, if you're gonna park there, just wait till.
Yeah. Are you Canadian?
I am not.
I thought you were Canadian. We're from Canada. We're from Calgary.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've traveled there before. Very nice up there.
We're very close to Banff and Jasper.
All right, I told you we'd be going down the steepest hill in town. This is Chillicothe, named after the Chillicothe Pass in Alaska.
In Langley, BC.
Oh, wow.
It's the only street in town we do not plow in the winter. This one is barricaded off. Don't worry, we're having the brakes looked at Monday morning, so don't worry about it. Now that yellow house I pointed out with the glass solarium, the owners of that house did a lot to purchase the land to our right that is now Teddy Bear Park, a favorite park of our very youngest in town. Great place for under 8-year-olds.
That's nice. Teddy bear. Pareha ito dito yung teddy bear. Yung nakita ko rin yan eh, teddy bear park. It's only good for 8 years.
Oh, brakes are squeaking.
Pala tayo. Sino pala tayo?
At least they're doing something.
Yeah, they're holding.
Favorite too.
Oh my gosh.
Off to our right is the bottom of those Main Street stairs if you want a little exercise. 157 steps back up to where we were.
Yung kanina, di ba? Yung pinagawa namin.
157 steps. Yang. Tipang na.
Kano?
Lima lang. No?
Yeah, I was thinking we could go there or just even this place.
As I turn the corner here, I do want you to look at the telephone pole off to our right. I'm pointing at it. There's a little yellow and white tag there. That was the high water mark for the flood of 1965. The water was 4 feet over the bridge deck. They
Oh,
brought
wow.
down prisoners and high school volunteers to try to erect a dike and save the downtown. It had mixed results as almost every basement did flood.
Another reason to be a connoisseur. Right. Well, yeah.
Let's do a better job of
Very good driver.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay, mga trompo. Balik tayo sa studio.
This was great.
that ends our
I
tour.
know.
Thank you for riding along. I can answer some questions if you have any.